August, 1977. A maid dusted the wrong doorknob at Graceland. Inside, a room frozen since 1958. Elvis's reaction changed everything. Maria Chen had worked at Graceland for 3 months, and she knew the rules. The upstairs hallway had 7 doors. 6 were fair territory for cleaning. 1, the door with the brass plate that read private, was absolutely off limits. No exceptions. No questions. The head housekeeper, a woman named Dorothy Williams who'd been with the Presley family since the early 60s, had made that crystal clear on Maria's first day. That door stays closed. You don't touch the knob. You don't lean against it. You don't even look at it too long. Understood? Maria had understood. For 3 months she'd walked past that door twice a day, eyes forward, duster in hand, respecting the boundary like it was electrified. Until the morning of August 12, 1977, when her hand slipped. She'd been cleaning the carved woodwork near the staircase, reaching high to get dust from the crown molding, when she lost her balance. Her hand shot out reflexively, grabbing for stability, and landed on the nearest surface, a doorknob. The wrong doorknob. The forbidden one. And in that split second of contact, something gave. The latch clicked. The door drifted open 6 inches with a whisper of old hinges that hadn't moved in years. The smell hit her first. Not decay or mustiness, but something else. Perfume. A specific scent that Maria couldn't quite identify. Floral and old-fashioned, like something her grandmother might have worn in the 1950s. It hung in the air despite 19 years having passed, as if the molecules themselves had been preserved along with everything else. And beneath the perfume, furniture polish, fresh laundry, the faint chemical tang of cleaning products. Someone had been maintaining this room, keeping it pristine, even though no one lived in it. Look at what happened in Maria's mind during those first 3 seconds. Pure panic flooded her nervous system, that fight-or-flight response that comes when you know you've crossed a line you can't uncross. Her training as a housekeeper, always be professional, never invade privacy, respect boundaries without question, collided head-on with basic human curiosity. The door was open. She could see inside. And what she saw didn't make sense with anything Dorothy had told her about storage rooms or private spaces. The room was perfectly preserved. Not dusty, not abandoned, but maintained like a museum exhibit where every object had significance. The bed was made with a pink chenille bedspread, the kind of textured fabric popular in the 50s, with hospital corners so crisp and tight they could have been measured with a ruler. The morning light coming through gauze curtains created a soft, diffused glow that made everything look slightly unreal, like a photograph that had been carefully staged and lit. A vanity table held cosmetics arranged in precise rows, lipstick in a gold tube, powder compact with an ornate design on the lid, hairbrush with a tortoiseshell handle, and strands of dark hair still caught in the bristles. Those hairs, evidence of grooming sessions that had happened 2 decades ago, sent a chill through Maria. This wasn't just preservation. This was something deeper, something that bordered on shrine keeping. A calendar hung on the wall, its pages frozen, at August 1958, 19 years ago, nearly 2 decades, and someone, Elvis presumably, had kept this room exactly as it was the day his mother died. Not approximately. Not close enough. Exactly. The same bedspread pattern, the same cosmetics in the same positions, the same calendar showing the same month. Time had stopped here in a way that felt both touching and unsettling. Maria pulled the door shut so fast the latch barely caught. Her heart was hammering. She looked left, then right, checking if anyone had seen. The hallway was empty, but she could hear voices downstairs. Elvis was home. He'd been recording in the small studio he'd set up in the basement, working on material for an album that his manager kept pushing him to finish. If he found out she'd opened that door... Wait. Here's what you need to understand about Elvis Presley in August 1977. He wasn't the young, vibrant performer who'd revolutionized music 20 years earlier, who'd caused riots with his hip movements and scandalized parents with his raw sexuality. He was 42 years old, overweight, somewhere north of 250 pounds, on a frame built for 170, struggling with prescription drug dependence that had started with army-issued amphetamines and spiraled into a daily cocktail of sedatives, painkillers, and stimulants. He was increasingly isolated inside Graceland's walls, rarely touring anymore. His last great performance, the Aloha from Hawaii special in 1973, already 4 years behind him, and fading into memory. The one constant in his life, the one thing that had never changed or diminished since 1958, was his grief for his mother. Gladys Love Presley had been everything to him. In the poverty of his Tupelo childhood, when Vernon, his father, had been in and out of work and occasionally in jail, Gladys had been the anchor. She'd worked in a factory. She'd done laundry for other families. She'd made sure Elvis had food even when she went without. They'd been unusually close, sleeping in the same bed long past the age when most boys moved to their own rooms. Some biographers later speculated about codependency, about an unhealthy attachment that had prevented Elvis from forming normal adult relationships. But to Elvis, it had just been love, pure, uncomplicated, unconditional love. Gladys had died of a heart attack on August 14, 1958, complicated by hepatitis and years of alcohol use that Elvis either hadn't known about or had chosen not to see. He'd been 23, stationed in Germany with the army, counting down the months until his discharge. When the call came, "Your mother is ill, you need to come home." He'd gotten emergency leave immediately, but commercial flights were slow in 1958, and by the time he'd arrived at Methodist Hospital in Memphis, she was already gone. That loss, that specific failure to be present when she needed him most, even though he couldn't have known, couldn't have prevented it, couldn't have done anything differently, had shaped everything that came after. Dorothy found Maria in the linen closet. 20 minutes later, folding towels with shaking hands. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Dorothy said, her tone more observation than concern. She was a practical woman in her 50s, grey hair pulled back in a bun, hands weathered from decades of housework. Nothing. I'm fine. Did you touch that door?" The question was so direct that Maria's face gave her away before her mouth could form a lie. Dorothy sighed, not angry, just resigned. "How far did it open?" 6 inches. Maybe less. I closed it right away. "Did you go inside?" "No. I swear." Dorothy studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Here's what's going to happen. You're not going to mention this to anyone. Not the other staff. Not your friends. Nobody. And you're definitely not going to mention it to Mr. Presley. That room is—" She paused, searching for the right words. "It's sacred to him. You understand? Not metaphorically. Actually sacred." Notice how Dorothy didn't explain further. She didn't need to. The weight of those 19 years lived in that closed door, in that preserved space, in the way everyone at Graceland moved around it like water flowing around a stone. But Maria's slip had consequences, because 3 hours later, Elvis went upstairs to rest before his evening recording session, and something was different. He could feel it the moment he reached the landing. The air was wrong, the energy was disturbed. He stood in the hallway, perfectly still, his eyes moving from door to door until they locked onto the one with the brass plate, and he knew someone had touched it. His hand trembled as he reached for the knob. The door opened with that same whisper of old hinges, and Elvis stepped inside for the first time in 6 months. He tried to visit regularly weekly when he could manage it, but lately the visits had become harder, too painful, too much like picking at a wound that would never quite heal. The room looked exactly as it should. Bed made, vanity organized, calendar still showing August 1958. But there was something, a shifted angle to the door, maybe, or a subtle change in the air pressure, that told him someone else had been here, had seen inside, had witnessed his private grief made tangible. Remember that Elvis Presley was not an ordinary person dealing with ordinary grief. He was a global icon who'd lost his mother at the peak of his early fame, who'd been surrounded by yes-men and opportunists for 2 decades, who'd watched his marriage fail and his career stagnate. This room was the only place where none of that mattered. In here he wasn't Elvis, he was just a son who missed his mama. He sat on the edge of the bed. Carefully, always carefully, never disturbing the bedspread too much, and picked up the hairbrush from the vanity. The dark hairs caught in the bristles were all he had left of her physical presence. DNA, if you want to be clinical about it. Proof that Gladys Love Presley had existed, had been real, had brushed her hair on countless mornings in this room before hepatitis and heart failure had taken her at 42, the same age Elvis was now. That symmetry wasn't lost on him. Downstairs, Dorothy was having a quiet conversation with Charlie Brooks, the house manager, who'd been with Elvis since the mid-60s. Charlie was the kind of man who knew how to be invisible when necessary and present when required, a skill that had made him indispensable in the chaotic ecosystem of Elvis's life. Someone opened the room, Dorothy said without preamble. Charlie's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. Who? New girl. Maria. Accident. She lost her balance, grabbed the knob. Did she go in? She says no. I believe her. But the door opened. Charlie was already moving toward the stairs. Is he up there now? Been up there 40 minutes. That was too long. Elvis's visits to his mother's room followed a pattern: 15 minutes of sitting, maybe 20 on hard days, then back to the world. 40 minutes meant he was spiraling, getting lost in the grief, letting it pull him under. Charlie took the stairs 2 at a time. But here's the part you can't miss. This wasn't just about a room. It was about the way Elvis had tried to freeze time, to create a space where loss couldn't touch him, because everything remained exactly as it was. Psychologists might call it complicated grief or pathological mourning. Elvis just called it love. Charlie found him sitting on the bed, hairbrush in hand, tears running down his face. Not sobbing. Elvis rarely allowed himself that release, just silent tears that came from a deep, ancient well of sadness. Hey boss, Charlie said softly from the doorway. You've been up here a while. Elvis didn't look up. Someone was in here. Door catch probably loosened with time. Old house. Things shift. Don't lie to me, Charlie. Someone opened this door. There was no point in denying it. Charlie stepped into the room, only the 3rd or 4th time he'd been inside in all his years at Graceland, and sat in the chair by the vanity. One of the new staff. Complete accident. She didn't go in, didn't touch anything, just saw it for a second before she closed it again. Elvis's jaw tightened. Fire her. Boss. I don't want someone working here who can't follow simple instructions. She lost her balance, grabbed for stability. Could have happened to anyone. It didn't happen to anyone. It happened to someone who doesn't understand. Elvis's voice cracked. He stopped, took a breath, started again. Who doesn't understand what this room means? Notice the shift from anger to vulnerability. That's the thing about grief. It doesn't follow logical patterns. It erupts in unexpected moments, triggered by things that seem minor to everyone else. An open door, a shifted angle, a broken boundary that had held for 19 years. Charlie let the silence settle before speaking again. You want to tell me what's really bothering you? Elvis looked at the calendar on the wall. August 1958. It's almost the anniversary. 19 years. She's been gone longer than I knew her. That doesn't seem right, does it? How can someone be gone longer than they were present? That's how time works, unfortunately. Time's a thief. Elvis set the hairbrush back on the vanity, positioning it exactly where it had been. Steals everything. Your youth, your voice, the people you love, and all you can do is try to hold on to something. Anything, even if it's just a room. What Elvis didn't say, what he couldn't articulate even to Charlie, was that maintaining this room had become a ritual of control in a life where he controlled very little. His career was managed by Colonel Tom Parker, a man Elvis increasingly resented but couldn't escape. His health was deteriorating, despite the doctors he employed. His daughter Lisa Marie lived mostly with Priscilla in California. But this room he could preserve. This room he could keep exactly as it should be. A small victory against entropy. Downstairs, Maria was preparing to leave for the day when Dorothy stopped her. He knows, Dorothy said simply. About the door. Maria's face went pale. Am I fired? Not yet. Maybe not at all. But you need to understand something about this place. About him. Mr. Presley isn't like other people. He's got money and fame and all the things people think they want, but he's also got holes in him that nothing can fill. That room upstairs? That's him trying to fill one of those holes. It doesn't work, can't work, but he keeps trying because what else is he going to do? I didn't mean to. I know you didn't, but intent doesn't always matter when you're dealing with someone's grief. Just remember that if you stay here, everything in this house revolves around what that man needs, and one of the things he needs is for that room to stay closed. Wait, before we go further, you should know what happened in the months after Gladys died. Elvis had been devastated, genuinely broken in a way that people who knew him said he never fully recovered from. The army had given him emergency leave, but he'd arrived hours too late. His mother was already gone. The guilt of that, of being absent when she needed him, even though he couldn't have known, couldn't have prevented it. became a weight he carried for the rest of his life. He bought Graceland in 1957, partly so his parents could have a home befitting their son's success. Gladys had loved the house, had chosen the decor for her bedroom with care. When she died, Elvis couldn't bring himself to change anything. Not the bedspread, not the cosmetics, not the calendar showing the month she'd left him. It became a shrine, though he never called it that. He just called it Mama's room. And for 19 years, he'd maintained it, hired staff specifically to dust and vacuum without disturbing anything, replaced the bedspread when it wore out with an exact match, even kept the same brand of perfume on the vanity, replacing the bottles when they evaporated but never moving them from their assigned spots. It was preservation as prayer, maintenance as meditation. That evening Elvis was supposed to record vocals for a new song, but he couldn't focus. He kept thinking about the open door, about Maria seeing inside, about the violation of that sacred space. Finally, around midnight, he asked Charlie to bring Maria to the studio. She came in terrified, expecting to be fired or worse, yelled at by Elvis Presley, the man whose voice had shaped a generation and whose temper could be volcanic when provoked. But Elvis was quiet when she arrived, sitting on a stool with his guitar, looking tired and older than 42. "Dorothy says you opened my mother's door by accident," he said without preamble. "Yes, sir. I'm so sorry. It was completely—" He held up a hand, stopping her. "What did you see?" Maria hesitated. This felt like a test, though she wasn't sure what the right answer was. A bedroom, very neat, pink bedspread, a vanity with personal items, a calendar. "What year on the calendar?" 1958, sir." Elvis nodded slowly. "My mama died in 1958, August 14th. 2 days from now will be 19 years. You know what I realized today? I'm older now than she ever got to be. That seems wrong, doesn't it? A son outliving his mama's age." Maria didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Elvis seemed to appreciate the silence. "I keep that room the way it was because—" He paused, struggling to find words for something he'd never really articulated, even to himself. The guitar in his hands was a Les Paul, well worn from years of use, and he strummed it absently as he spoke. "Because if I change it, if I let it become something else, a guest room or an office or just empty space, then she's really gone. As long as that room exists exactly as she left it, with her hairbrush still holding her hair, and her perfume still sitting on the vanity, and that damn calendar still showing the month she died, then some part of her is still here, still with me. Does that make any kind of sense to you?" Maria chose her words carefully. "Yes, sir. I think so. It's like keeping a photograph, except bigger." "Exactly." Elvis's face lit up with the relief of being understood. "It's a photograph you can walk into, a moment you can sit inside, and for a few minutes when I'm in there, I can pretend she's just downstairs, or out shopping, or visiting neighbors, just temporarily absent, not permanently gone. Do you think I'm crazy for doing that?" The vulnerability in his voice was startling. This was Elvis Presley, asking a housekeeper he barely knew whether his grief had pushed him into madness. It was such a direct question that Maria answered honestly, from her heart. "I think you loved your mother very much, Mr. Presley. I don't think there's anything crazy about wanting to hold on to that love, in whatever way makes sense to you. Grief doesn't follow rules." Something in Elvis's face softened. "You've got family you're close to?" Elvis asked, shifting the conversation away from his own pain. "My grandmother. She raised me in San Francisco after my parents died. She's 78 now." "Then you understand. When you love someone like that, when they're the foundation of everything, losing them is—" He shook his head. "It's like losing gravity. You just float around trying to find something to hold on to. Look at what was happening here." Elvis wasn't talking to Maria the housekeeper. He was talking to Maria the person, someone who might understand, who wouldn't judge or try to manage or monetize his grief. It was a rare moment of genuine connection in a life increasingly devoid of them. "I'm not going to fire you," Elvis said finally, "but I need you to promise me something. That door stays closed. Always. And if anyone, management, press, tourists doing unauthorized house tours, if anyone ever asks about that room, you don't know anything. It's just a storage room, nothing special. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir. Absolutely." "Good. Now get out of here. It's late." Maria left quickly, relieved and somehow moved by the encounter. She'd seen something genuine in Elvis Presley, something the cameras and stage lights never captured, a man trying desperately to hold on to love in the only way he knew how. But the incident had stirred something in Elvis. For the next 3 days, leading up to the August 14th anniversary, he spent more time in his mother's room than he had in years. Hours at a stretch, sitting on the bed, touching her things, talking to her like she could hear him. Charlie and Dorothy took turns checking on him, worried but understanding that this was something he had to process alone. Remember that in 2 weeks Elvis Presley would be dead, found in his bathroom at Graceland, 42 years old, his body finally giving out from years of prescription drug abuse and poor health. The official cause would be cardiac arrhythmia, but everyone who knew him understood it was more complicated than that. He'd been dying slowly for years, grief and fame and loneliness eroding him from the inside. But in those final days, sitting in his mother's preserved bedroom, something shifted. Not healing, he was beyond that by then, but a kind of acceptance. He'd kept the room frozen for 19 years, trying to stop time, trying to keep her present, and it hadn't worked. She was still gone. The room was still just a room, no matter how perfectly he maintained it. On August 14th, 1977, the 19th anniversary, Elvis went to the room one last time. He sat on the bed, picked up the hairbrush, and spoke aloud to his mother for what would be the final time. "I tried, Mama. I tried to keep everything just right. But I'm so tired. I don't know how much longer I can do this." No one heard what else he said. Dorothy was downstairs giving him privacy. Charlie was running errands. The other staff had been instructed to stay clear. Whatever conversation Elvis had with his mother's memory that day remained between them. But when he came downstairs 2 hours later, something had changed in his face. Not peace, exactly, but resignation. Like he'd made a decision or come to terms with something. He asked Dorothy to make sure the room stayed maintained after he was gone. Not as a shrine necessarily, but as a memorial, a place that acknowledged love and loss without trying to deny either one. Dorothy promised, though at the time she didn't realize how soon after he was gone would be. 2 weeks later, Elvis would be dead, and the room would pass into the care of Priscilla and Lisa Marie, eventually becoming part of the Graceland Museum tour, though visitors weren't allowed inside. They could look through a doorway, see the preserved space, but they couldn't enter. It remained sacred, just as Elvis had wanted. Notice something about how this story unfolds. It's not about a famous person doing something strange. It's about a human being trying to cope with loss in the only way that made sense to him. Elvis had the money and means to preserve his mother's room perfectly, but the grief driving that preservation was universal. Anyone who's lost someone they loved understands the impulse to hold on to physical reminders, to keep things as they were, to resist change because change feels like betrayal. Maria continued working at Graceland until Elvis died, then moved on to another job in Memphis. She never told anyone about her conversation with Elvis that night in the studio, keeping her promise to protect the privacy of his grief. Decades later, when Graceland became a tourist destination and the story of Gladys's preserved room became public, Maria would occasionally think about that moment when her hand slipped and she glimpsed inside. She'd been witness to something deeply personal. Not Elvis the star, but Elvis the son, still mourning his mother 19 years after her death. That's the real story here. Not that Elvis Presley kept a room unchanged for nearly 2 decades, but why he did it and what it revealed about the human need to hold on to love, even when the person we love is gone. The room was never really about his mother. It was about him, about his inability to process her loss, about his need for something in his chaotic life to remain constant, about the way grief can become a kind of anchor, even as it drags you down. And if you're very lucky, if you handle loss with more grace than Elvis managed, you'll find ways to remember without freezing time. You'll keep the love without keeping the room. You'll move forward while still honoring the past. That's the lesson in this story. Not that Elvis was wrong to grieve, but that grief shouldn't become a prison, a place you lock yourself inside for 19 years until you forget how to get out. The lights at Graceland still glow every night. Tourists still walk the halls, peering into rooms where Elvis lived and loved and suffered. And upstairs, behind a door visitors can't enter, Gladys's room remains preserved, not exactly as Elvis left it, but close enough. A memorial to a mother and a son, to love and loss, to the things we try to hold on to, and the ways time steals them anyway. That's the real story. That's what you take with you when you leave.